Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Alex Rodriguez. I'm a DBA student at the University of the Incarnate Word. And I want to start off by thanking AABRI for allowing me to present my research on the Online Consortium of Independent Colleges and Universities, which is a consortium of 71 different uh, higher education institutions that cross register via a single platform from institution to institution. And what this research does is uses cluster analysis to really get a better idea as to the types of institutions that comprise their membership. Now, before we get started, I think it's a good idea to talk about uh, the basics of what's going on in higher ed right now. Right now, we see major demographic changes, especially as it relates to birth rates, that are forcing institutions to become more tuition driven as time goes on. As a result, they're having to employ a customer model, which they typically don't have the activity set or the competencies to really support. And this is especially true amongst tuition-driven colleges. And what you're starting to see is that some of them are looking uh, to try some form of semi-consolidation, and OCICU is a channel for this and is an option for them, especially as they look to fill empty seats within their classes. Now, this study in particular is an exploratory study, and what we're really looking at is to see, through the means of cluster analysis, as to whether or not the institutions within OCICU's membership can be segmented, and if they can be segmented, how might it be best for OCICU to market to multiple segments, right? And what this can do is really better inform, sort of the broader higher ed ecosystem, um, into how to best to share basically. So, for example, you see some institutions sharing things like like HR practices or accounting functions and things like that. This is more on the front end. And so, since it's on the front end, we can talk about things like, how does this really add value to the student experience, which is incredibly important for a tuition-driven college. Um, it also can give OCICU a better insight as to who their members actually are, and based on who they actually are, how they define value. Also, we're hopeful that this particular um, study can help inform enrollment strategies for the member institutions. If they better understand what the value is, uh, yeah, that OCICU offers, they can in turn communicate that value to their students. And of course, we're hoping that this research can be built upon as there's more research done about consolidated efforts in higher education. So one of the things we have to really discuss uh, before we get started is the student as a customer. This idea that in spite of institutional resistance at most colleges, the students have fundamentally become a customer. Now, this is wrought with all kinds of problems, right? Um, Number one, institutions don't really have the capability or the competency to truly conduct customer marketing efforts and um, in a way that can drive a better student experience. The other thing is that acquisition and retention efforts usually what the research shows is that it's sort of revolving around this short-term gratification for students. So things like, let's build a better dorm, let's build a better gym, all these kinds of things that you see colleges investing a lot of money in, that um, will satisfy the student for a week, a month, a semester, but generally speaking, don't really add to the value that the student is looking for. This is especially problematic amongst small tuition-driven colleges and universities like the ones that make up the OCIC membership. And then, of course, the customer's always right. Now, this is a marketing mentality that is, that most of the research would argue is dated, uh, and is dated within industry, and it's dated within higher ed as well. Um, the problem is that these colleges, because they're tuition driven, and because of the economics surrounding higher ed, find themselves in this position to where they have to make the customer always right. And as a result, that has led to um, the you know course loads and course offerings that are oftentimes not in line with the broader mission of the institution, or grading practices that we see that oftentimes lead to inflated grades, and so this has become a little bit of an issue. So especially when education should fundamentally be a co-creative experience. Now, what should marketing look like in higher ed? First off, we have to understand product marketing and how it's defined in higher education. That at small tuition driven institutions, it is about creating a product that speaks to the value of the customer, right? And online learning can enhance this experience, especially at a small tuition driven institution that can't sit there and offer sections of the same course every single semester, right? And the way the customer determines value is also based on programs more so than institutional brands. Now, if you were to look at the literature on higher education economics, as we said, demographics have shifted, and as a result, the environment has become highly competitive. Institutions are expected to sort of do anything and everything, while at the same time having a customer that is significantly more price sensitive than they used to be. This is incredibly problematic for smaller tuition-driven colleges that are fundamentally competing on net price, because the level of differentiation is not nearly as profound as it is at non-tuition-driven colleges. Um, and excuse me, and students are sort of constantly redefining values. So for universities that are and colleges that are a little more cash strapped, this becomes incredibly difficult to keep up with. And also, as you see when you look at what's going on in higher education, you're seeing a large investment in non-academic activities and enrollment strategies that really, especially tuition-driven colleges, that focus on quantity over quality. And this has oftentimes gotten a lot of institutions, especially those who have closed, into trouble because of the fact that they'll spend a lot of money trying to acquire students who are oftentimes leaving the college for one reason or another after 6 months, or after one or two semesters. And most marketing efforts focus on branding and marketing communication, which don't really inform the basic customer experience of attending a particular institution. And so most of the consolidation efforts that we're seeing are more in on the are more partial consolidation than like full on mergers and acquisitions, which are likely to accelerate over time, but are even in the short term are pretty rare. Even for colleges that are distressed, most colleges will fundamentally just close. Um, and where you oftentimes see resource sharing is like in IT or library services, but we're seeing expanded offerings through what Harrison Smith and Kenton refer to as trans-regional university alliances, which OCICU would qualify as one of those. And cluster analysis isn't typically used in a higher ed setting, but it has been used on IPEDS data before, which is uh, the the basis of this study, and it's been used at the institutional level. This is a very common statistical technique that we use to determine value to customers and differentiate from one segment to another. And it has also been used to segment students as well. Now, if you look at OCICU and their membership, they're they're these are the basic descriptive statistics based on the data gleaned from NCES iPads. And you'll see that very few of them, take an admissions test. They've, generally speaking, generous admissions policies. They have a significant online presence. The endowments are small, and the net assets are relatively small. You see low four-year grad rates, low average net price, for private higher ed. Retention is low, but these are really small schools. Now, as it relates to descriptive stats, they've not been standardized, but going forward, we will standardize continuously measured variables, before running the cluster analysis. And in using, excuse me, in using a methodology, or the cluster analysis methodology for this particular research, NCES IPEDS measures, roughly, it's about 2,000 variables. And we selected specifically 50 different variables by which to examine. And the selection of those variables was based primarily on the literature that had previously been conducted on higher education and higher education marketing, especially as it related to customer marketing, customer marketing efforts by colleges and universities. There was some missing data, and what we did was we initially, we imputed the data with 5 different imputations, and and once that was completed, we dealt with the outliers, and we kept the outliers in, because there were 71 colleges, and the outliers weren't that extreme either. And when we standardize the variables, a lot of the variables that we have here are, we did include continuous and categorical variables. And we do realize that there are some limitations in this, when we try to cluster them. And that we're still, exploring different algorithms as to how to have categorical variables in the clustering stage of the analysis. But at this point, the most of this is used to profile the data. And so these are fundamentally preliminary results that are a work in progress. And so we used a number of different, like I said, 50 different variables. And the first thing we did, of course, was conduct a hierarchical cluster analysis that showed us on a preliminary basis that there were 2 different clusters that made up this membership, and this was confirmed by a Kolinsky pseudo F test as well. And when the objects were partitioned through the k-means cluster analysis, or you're using k-means cluster analysis, they came up with two different clusters. The first cluster was comprised of 31 institutions, which we label as access institutions, and the second cluster was made up of 40 institutions, which we call conventional institutions. And we'll get into what those definitions mean in the next slide. And then after that, we use t-tests with unequal variances on each and every single variable to determine statistical significance. Now, one of the things that we saw were that we saw a number of variables, obviously, that hit a 95% confidence level. And we also saw some that really did a great job of profiling the variables at a 90% confidence level. And so if you look at access institutions, right, these institutions have a higher percentage of non-white students, higher percentage of part-time students. They're more female. They tend to be more urban. And when I say more urban, again, these are this is you know a categorical variable based on a sort of what is basically a 1 to 5 scale. And these access institutions tend to be in more urban areas. Um, they also tend to just be geared for adults and part-time learning. They're definitely competing on price. They're not competing on sort of a student experience, like an on-campus student experience that you would find at other schools. Uh, they have like alternative tuition payment plans, things like that. If you look at conventional institutions, this when we think of like the traditional college, the traditional student experience, this is exactly what it is we're talking about. For example, they tend to have NCAA membership. They tend to be more research driven based on Carnegie classification, which is a 1 to 5 scale, uh, indicating the amount of research that is typically conducted at a college. They have the existence of a meal plan, which is sort of our indicator or one of our indicators of of an on-campus experience, and that's based on a 0 to 1 scale. And also, they spend more on academic support. Typically, at most access institutions, they tend to because the student population tends to be very uh, com- part-time driven, commuter driven. They tend not to invest a lot of money in those types of efforts. Whereas on-campus experiences, because the student is typically on campus a lot more, tend to invest a lot of money in those kinds of resources. And so when you look at these results, again, access institutions, they focus on non-traditional students. They stress convenience and affordability. They're less focused on the student experience, and they really do appeal to non-white and female students. Conventional institutions, on the other hand, focus on the traditional 18 to 22-year-old demographic. Full-time students are the primary customer. They have higher net prices and just a more robust on-campus student experience. So what do we recommend? For OCICU, they need to have distinct customer marketing programs for access institutions and conventional institutions. They are fundamentally unique segments, and as a result, they need to be treated as such. Um, they also, we also recommend based on the different types of institutions, major qualitative investigation to really understand these very distinct voices of the customer. The needs of an access institution of an offering like OCICU is likely to be very different than that of a conventional institution. And if OCICU is going to continue to market to these institutions, they need to be very clear uh, as to what it is they want and how it is they can further expand their offerings in order to fulfill their needs. And they need and what this can also do and what they should do with this information is be conducting their own market analysis, their own marketing research, uh, as it relates to how they communicate with their customers. So, for example, they should be continuously testing, what kind of communications, what type of offerings are being are preferred by customers, which you would typically see in a for-profit marketing setting. So, for example, if they were to send out an email, they need to hold a test and control group to see, if the email has been effective and driving, for example, more potential customers to OCICU. Um, so they need to measure this, and continue to iterate the product based on what they learn from their customers and from the usage of the product itself. And if you have any questions about this research, Dr. Guerrero or I can be reached via phone or email. Thank you so much for joining me today. You can post any questions in the comments section, and one of us will be happy to answer them. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.